Hi, friends. Maybe today we can talk a little bit about genealogy, the genealogy of Jesus, or the family tree of Jesus, and how does that help us in our own family tree, in our own families? Well, let's start with this dysfunctional families. We use that term a lot today, and it means a lot of things, but just that there's not that families are not fully functioning and properly functioning, right? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't know any family that is fully functional and that is properly functioning well, where all the members are just at a 100% and they're perfect. There is no perfect family. And therefore, to greater or lesser degrees, we all come from some sort of dysfunction in our families. But the question is, what do we do with that, not just that knowledge, but that reality? Is there something that is in scriptures that can give us hope? And the answer is most definitely yes. The scriptures address every aspect of human life, and not just like the problem, but also the solution. And it gives us the hope. And that's the case with the genealogy of Jesus. One of the reasons why Matthew records it is to show the characters and the personalities that are in Jesus' own family tree. So he names 42 generations of ancestors. He starts all the way back with Abraham, our father in faith. He goes through David and his kingdom, through the Babylonian exile, and down to the time of Joseph, Jesus' adoptive family. And he shows that unbroken line of certainly of God's covenant promises, like for instance, that a shoot shall sprout from the stump of Jesse. Well, David's father was Jesse, and that sprout that's going to shoot from that stump that has been cut down, David's kingdom has been cut down, is going to be the Messiah. It's going to be that Davidic king. Is going to be that king whose kingdoms last forever. Yes, so he tells the genealogy for those purposes. But I think there are many layers in that genealogy that can help us with our own families and give us hope. So I want to do this by pointing out just a couple of those characters in Jesus' family tree. Let's pick Ruth, we'll pick Rahab, and then of course let's pick David, and probably the one that we know the best in his family tree. So Ruth. Ruth is not actually a true Israelite. She is a Moabite, meaning that she's an outsider. And this is good for us to know, because that means that Jesus was born into not a perfect family tree, but also he was born into a family where some of his own people were outside of the promised people. This is so important to us, because sometimes we feel as if we're outside of a proper relationship with God. We feel like we're not part of the crowd. We feel disconnected from others, not part of the group, not part of the family. We feel as if we don't belong in a church. And it could be any number of events that happen in our lives that contribute to that: deficits, hurts, wounds, lies, whatever, insecurities that contribute to us living in a dysfunctional world, a broken world, where we start to believe these things about ourselves, and we feel in our bones as if we are the outsider. And it's so good for us, even just through Ruth's life, to know that Jesus was born into a family like this, with ancestors that were outsiders. That this is part of his family heritage. And I want to come back to then why he chose to be born into a family like this, and that aspect, that quality of feeling like an outsider. Let's move to Rahab, though. Rahab was a prostitute, and prostitutes were were considered to be great sinners in the Old Testament and New Testament. So one of Jesus' ancestors was considered to be a great sinner. Sometimes you and I feel like sinners. We feel as if we're not worthy to be a brother and sister of Jesus Christ, to be a son and daughter of God. We're not worthy to, what is the phrase, to darken the doors of a church, because of how we feel about ourselves, because of what we've done with our lives or haven't done with our lives. Again, any number of things can contribute to this, including our sins, that make us feel as if we're just not worthy. And then what do we end up doing? We end up staying away. And sometimes for years in our lives, because we feel as if we are sinners who are not worthy of being a part of Jesus' family. And yet, this is the family that Jesus chooses to join. He did not join a perfect family. He did not join a family because it didn't have great sinners. He chose to join a family that had some pretty big sinners in order, we're going to get to that in a second. But just that he chose to be with a family like this is so good for us to hear, because we have felt like that. And we have felt like that sometimes in our own families. David. Of course, we're all familiar with the life of David. Loved God a great deal, called a man after God's own heart, right? We even use that phrase to this day, a son after his father's own heart, a man after, whatever. So, a man after, but not just a man after God's own heart, he was a murderer. And it started with adultery. I mean, he had everything in the world that a man could possibly want. And he wanted another man's wife. And so he pursued that. He pursued Bathsheba. But she was the wife of Uriah. And then when Bathsheba becomes pregnant with his son, King David's son, because Uriah's been off on a battle and hasn't been with his wife, Bathsheba, and she knew it and he knew it, and so did David know it, because he's the commander of the armies. He brings Uriah back and tries to get Uriah to stay with his wife, but Uriah won't leave his men. He's living with his men in order to show them no favors, or show himself no favors. So ultimately then, David, desperate because of his sin, that's what sin causes in us, to do things that we would usually not do. He sends Uriah out into the front lines, and knowing that Uriah is going to die. So he sends Uriah to his death. He is directly responsible for the death of Uriah. He murders a man in order to take that man's wife who he has impregnated. So, my God. I mean, that's pretty bad, right? And it is into this family that Jesus chooses to become a member. What does Jesus do then with this heritage of a family like Ruth and Rahab and also David and a host of other characters? He redeems it. He redeems it. He comes to join our brokenness, our broken humanity, our broken families, our broken churches, our broken world. Not because we have our act together, and then therefore he'll join us, but precisely because we don't have our act together. And we need somebody to intervene, to interrupt, to insert themselves, and to stop the cycle of whatever addictions or abuse or habitual sins, or of neglect of our faith and of our religion, of the way we treat one another as members of families, the way we go, to interrupt that by inserting his own humanity into our humanity, and to do something different, something better, something more. Jesus joins our humanity in order to save us from ourselves. From ourselves as individuals, from the stuff that we pick up in our families that is not of God, in our churches, and so on. He comes and he joins a dysfunctional family. And when we join our humanity in our dysfunction, however those get manifested, to him who is the perfect human and fully God, then here's something so beautiful and so hopeful for us, is that he can take these bad parts of us and he can redeem them, and he can renew us, and he can make us more than we ever were before. And through the process of that, we will come to know his grace, and we will fall even more in love with him. Not despite our sins, but because of our sins, which we've given to him. And not despite the fact that other people have hurt us, but because we have brought that hurt to other people, and he's healed us and set us free to become fully the persons that God has created us to be, members of his family. Until next time.